Chapter 9. In this chapter, Huck and Jim are hiding out on Jackson's Island in the middle of the river, about 50 miles from Hannibal. The river gives them food in the form of fish, as well as fresh water. The Mississippi also provides them with a stray raft that they use for the majority of the novel. Finally, a house floats down the river past the island during a storm, and the pair manage to scavenge additional supplies from it. In the house, Jim finds a dead man, who is later revealed to be Pap. He decides that it would be better if Huck didn't know. This is possibly because Jim thinks that Huck would leave him if he knew that Pap was no longer a threat. At this point, the pair are not in a rush. They are not being chased yet.
Chapter 10. The river's role as a provider continues as Jim and Huck catch a 200-pound catfish. It also serves as their main means of transportation. Huck takes his canoe to St. Petersburg, dressed as a girl to obtain information, and his roguish ways begin to surface.
Chapter 11. Once Huck is off the river, he is caught in an intricate web of his own lies, eventually having to create another lie to cover for the failure of his first. He finds out that the townspeople are going to search Jackson's Island after convincing a woman in town that he was a runaway apprentice. She tells him that she had seen smoke coming from the island a few days before, the very same smoke that came from Huck and Jim's fire. Terrified, Huck goes back to warn Jim. They load their raft with all of their supplies and shove off down the river to begin their journey in earnest.
Chapter 12. Jim and Huck cautiously move along the Mississippi, covering the raft during the day and traveling by night. They make additions to the raft to make their journey easier, safer, and faster. The river has been a provider and caretaker to them so far, but they knew the dangers of the Mississippi. Huck occasionally goes ashore to purchase food, continuing the trend of mischievousness off the river. Sometimes Huck steals chickens on some of these outings. They also determine that borrowing some items is acceptable, further fueling their delinquent tendencies while on dry land. After a few visits to various villages, a large storm hits, causing a steamboat to crash along the rocks. Huck's adventurous side ignores Jim's pleas to ignore the wreck, and they set foot on the crashed vessel. Huck discovers that the robbers are murderous and greedy. They plan on killing one of their companions in order to gain additional profits. Huck and Jim's raft was swept away by the river, leaving them to fend for themselves on the boat with the bandits.
Chapter 13. Huck and Jim knew that they had to take drastic action in order to survive. Their chance presented itself when the bandits got greedy and chose to make one last trip into the steamboat to collect more loot. Jim and Huck used this opportunity to steal the bandits' boat and escape. They found the raft floating along as they sped downstream and managed to reclaim it. Huck's conscience told him to save the bandits, so he invented an elaborate lie to convince a steamboat captain in a nearby town to check on the wreckage. With a cleared conscience, he rejoined Jim on the raft. At the end of the chapter, the pair was heading towards the island to rest.
Chapter 14.
Huck and Jim spent this entire chapter off the river, looking at what they took from the bandits' boat. They found many books, cigars, and other supplies. Huck read to Jim and taught him about the nature of kings. Jim was amazed by the power that royalty held. They argued about the wisdom of King Solomon and why French people don't speak English. Huck realized that Jim can be incredibly stubborn at times, namely, while off the river. In previous chapters, Jim had submitted to Huck's will, particularly during the incident with the crashed steamboat that occurred on the river. In Southern society at this time, slaves were expected to be obedient. Jim is slowly adjusting to his newfound freedom. He realizes that he can speak his mind about Huck and be treated almost as an equal.
Chapter 15. The river unleashed its wrath on Huck and Jim by covering itself in a deep fog. Huck, in the canoe, was separated from Jim, who was in the raft. It took an entire day for Huck to find Jim asleep on the raft. Huck's mischievous side took over, and he thought that it would be funny to pretend that he had been on the raft the whole time and that Jim only dreamed of the fog. Once Jim realized that he was being tricked, he became very upset with Huck. Once again, Huck's conscience overwhelmed him, and he apologized to Jim. This is a very significant moment because it was considered unacceptable to apologize to a slave during this time period in the South.
Chapter 16. Huck's conscience kicked in again as they traveled down the river towards a town called Cairo. He began to feel guilty for helping Jim escape, and the feeling intensified when Jim began to talk about freeing his family by any means. He was willing to steal them if money wasn't enough. Much like the river in the previous chapter, Huck's mind was foggy. He felt that it was wrong to have stolen Jim from the widow. He would have turned Jim in, but he found that he was unable to because he was becoming emotionally attached to him. His morals were battling it out with the norms of society. Huck finally made up his mind. He decided to save Jim, regardless of the cost. He lied to a pair of slave hunters to prevent them from searching the raft and finding Jim. Things went downhill for them after that. Their canoe was stolen, they realized that they had passed Cairo, and their raft was crushed by a steamboat, almost killing them both. This chapter ends with Huck frantically searching for Jim while bobbing in the current of the Mississippi.